Well, we're here at the Alliance with Larry Tentinger. He's introduced by a common friend of ours, Paul Haish, down in Alcester. And this is going to be, it could be a two-part, three-part. And I'm just going to let you know that we are at the Alliance in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And it's a great place to bring military and civilian people together. I think it's partially owned by the VFW, American Legion,
Right.
some of those. And down in their gift shop, they do sell this book. And I now know two people in this book and going to get introduced to a third. But Ellen Nygaard gave me this book and signed it. But Larry is in this book. And like I said, it's in the gift shop downstairs. But in order to kick this off, I'm just going to read Larry's first paragraph in this book that came out in 2009. It's called Vietnam Vets Still Coming Home, Their Stories in Their Words. So this is Larry's first paragraph that they wrote. Throughout history, becoming part of the military has been a major part of young men's lives, a benchmark or rite of passage, whether by choice or by conscription. Family history and tradition often played a significant role, as sons were impressed by their father's and grandfather's service and wanted to honor them by continuing the legacy. Ethnic history also played a part in some cases. The defending warrior expectations of Native Americans, for example. Sometimes it was simply a case of doing one's duty, having growing up with the values of honor, courage, and commitment, both in and out of uniform. So that is how Larry's story started in here. I think it's maybe about 9 pages and some good pictures. Like we said, that was in 2009, so that's been a while. So with that introduction there, when I first met Larry, he was brought to the Hog House by our common friend Paul Haish, and was hanging out with a few of our friends that we go on a horseback trip every year out to the Black Hills. And he got to tell us some of his stories then. Yeah. And then when we started getting the idea of doing this podcast, I definitely thought of Larry on some of the episodes here. And like I said, it's more than likely going to be multi-part. It's got a lot of interesting things to discuss. And so during those discussions, it started at a very young age, your journey of being where you're at. So with that,
every journey has to start with the first step. Well, mine was a little rocky because I was born May 17th, 1950 in a little 5-bed hospital in Hawarden, Iowa. And I only weighed 2 pounds when I was born.
Oh, my word.
Then I got sick and down to 1 3/4 pounds. And I grew up my entire life kind of behind the curve just a little bit. But I also had a drive in me that's hard to explain. And it might have something to do with the fact that when I was born, I had a twin sister named Karen that only lived for 3 days.
Oh.
So even as a young child, a person can go one way or the other. You can be dejected and give up, or you can just say, okay, I'm going to fight through this and maybe live for 2 people. Mm-hmm. And I guess when I look back at my life, maybe I have, because it's really been a ride. And having that start of being the oldest in the family, but being the smallest, and going through school with my nickname being Little Larry.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I got to tell you, I had to fight back or give up.
Right.
One way or the other. And that's where kind of a couple defining moments, took place, during that time. And one of them was my younger brother beat me up twice, bad. And I could take anybody to those 2 spots.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was in about 7th grade. I'd been beaten up the second time. And the janitor at the school at West Sioux in Hawarden, Iowa, was cleaning out a big closet area, and there was a bar with a paint can on each side of cement, like a barbell thing, and he was going to throw it away. And I saw that, and I just asked him, "Can I have that?" And he goes, Yeah. So I carried it home on the bus with me. And I didn't tell anybody. My brothers, they saw it, but I took it in the garage, kind of back in the dark old area,
Right.
and I started training with one purpose in mind. And I trained and I trained, and this thing only weighed 40 pounds, but I'm like 70 pounds soaking wet. So I'm trying to get this thing above my head, and I do it. Finally, I'm doing 10 reps, 20 reps. Then I have to go to one hand, and I'm doing 10 reps, 20 reps. Then finally, the day came. My parents went off grocery shopping on a Saturday, and I picked a fight with him, my brother. And I beat the ever-living bejesus out of him. But when we laugh about it now, I was on top of him, pounding as hard as I could, but I only weighed 70 pounds, so I wasn't hurting him that bad. But he goes, stop, stop, and I never did until finally, gave up. So that was a good turning point for me. But still, I went into high school, pretty low self-esteem in a lot of ways. I weighed 90 pounds. My first day of gym class, I'll never forget it. This is back before all the protections they have, so you don't hurt kids' feelings, nowadays. So I'm walking out of the shower locker area, and the PE teacher was the athletic director. He says, "Come in here a minute." So he brought me into the office where all the other coaches are, and they just laughed at me. They said, "Look at that shrimp. We have somebody like that in this school," and that's what kind of took me off, on a life of, again, and we all have to do that. Are we going to give up, or are we going to fight back?
Right.
So what happened then after that point is I was wrestling, in West Sioux and Hayward, and nobody had a losing record. That was tough. It was good, hard work, and I was little, but a scrapper, and that was all fine. But in my senior year, I was, again, just so small and so little. And my younger brothers were all popular and bigger and everything. Well, I sent a letter off to the YMCA in Sioux City, Iowa, saying, "Please help me. What can you do for me?" And I explained myself a little bit. And I got a letter back from a guy who gave me a training program. And it's a push-pull. When I look back on it now, it was a push-pull program, chest, shoulders, and triceps one day, back, biceps, and the next. And you do it 2 days, heavy, and then anyway, I began training. I didn't go out for wrestling the final year, and the wrestling coach threw a wrestling shoe at me, and he was all pissed off. But I didn't care because I was only weighing 120 pounds, and I'm a senior in high school. Well, magic. Something started happening. I began getting stronger, and I got a little bigger, and I got up to about 140, 45 pounds during the spring of my senior year.
Really, that much in that short of a time?
About 20 pounds in the course of that school year.
Right.
Well, I began looking at Muscle and Fit, whatever it was called back then, and I just saw on the back pages they had competitions for lifting. And here I was lifting. I was not a bodybuilder, but I was lifting. And I found that there were meets being held. Now, keep in mind, this is 1968.
Right.
Powerlifting, the bench press hadn't been invented really and used till 1964. Before that, people were just using dumbbells and all this strength stuff. Well, this was a competition. So my parents, they put me on a bus, and they took me to Des Moines, Iowa, and I competed in a powerlifting competition in the 148-pound weight class. Wow. Never had been around anything like that in my life. I was the youngest competitor in the entire thing. There were no age groups. And at 148 pounds, I set the Iowa record in the deadlift with a 405 deadlift.
Oh, my word.
Back in 1968.
What'd your brother think of that? How much older was you?
Just a year. I mean, I was just a year older, than 3 years older than the other brother that beat me up before, too.
Oh, wow.
So, but at that point, we were good friends. So that took, it made a difference.
Right.
And it was pretty, it was a good thing in a lot of ways. And it's kind of like a dog. If you're a big dog, you don't have to bark. a lot. You can just stand there and get the job done.
Right.
Well, that's how I felt. I felt good about things, but I sure didn't want to cause trouble or look for trouble. And it just turned out, it became part of my life. And to this day, and I promise you this, the second we get done filming today, I'll be going to the gym.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
I'm 73. I have a shadow of my former self. We'll get into some of that later, maybe, of all the things I've been there, done that.
Right.
But it is part of my life, and the hour I spend affects the other 23. And it carried through with the military all the way, and that's a whole thing to it. I hope we get a chance to talk about what it means to live out values in the Marine Corps, and not just in your life. As you read a little earlier, I truly believe, and it was asked of me when I earned the honor of being Sailor of the Year, #1 out of 87,000. We'll get into that, the details of it later. But they asked me a question on the final board. They asked me a question.
Yeah.
Where do you derive your strength? And I looked them square in the eye. And I said, I derive my strength from my father, who was a Marine on Okinawa and Guadalcanal. And he lived out the values of honor, courage, and commitment, both in and out of uniform. And that's where I gained my strength. So we can look at strength from a lot of ways, but getting back to, when I grew up, I did have a father figure who was a Marine, Okinawa and Guadalcanal. You don't even read about that hardly anymore because it's so unbelievable. And this is just a little, fact that I found after my father died, and he died when I was in Desert Storm, that we hear a lot and see a lot about Iwo Jima, because of the statue, the pictures, Well, that battle was bad, and it lasted for around 37 days on the killing field. However, Okinawa, which took place after that, the average death rate on that island was 2,553 people per day for 83 days.
Oh, my word.
Unheard of. But that's counting the Okinawan civilians, the Japanese, and the American forces. And I remember my father, the only thing he ever mentioned, because when they came in, like in April, and when they landed and went in, and the Japanese had figured out what to do at that point, they pulled back and let everybody get on the shore and move inland a little bit. Then they pounded them. Well, they needed reinforcements, and my father got there on Mother's Day. And when it was really bad, if you read, it's just, but that's all he ever said. I got there on Mother's Day, but he had got permission from his parents, my grandparents, to join the Marine Corps early. He was 17 years old. Now, how many 17-year-olds today can even relate to the fact of seeing death of any kind, let alone the carnage and chaos that's around you in combat?
Mm-hmm.
But he come away from that being the person he was too.
Right. So as you were growing up, like you said, you were real small. You started lifting weights, had the issues with your brothers, worked through that. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You described it pretty well.
Yeah.
So your dad had that military experience. So when you were growing up, did you have thoughts of being in the military? And did your dad talk much about it? Or did it just kind of organically happen for you that it flowed into the beginning of your military career?
This might give you a hint.
Sure.
I was in kindergarten at a 2-room country school, K through 4 in one grade and 4 through 8 in another room. And in that kindergarten class, right before in Christmas break, Santa Claus showed up. And I can remember it like I'm looking at you. Mm-hmm. Santa Claus asked me, what do you want for Christmas? And I said, I want a pair of combat boots.
Oh, really?
And it impressed him so much. And I found this out a few years later because maybe a week during the Christmas break, this same Santa Claus showed up at our house and gave me a pair of combat boots. This man just was impressed with the fact that I would want that for Christmas. So I will have to say that yes, I had my dad gave me one of his army blankets, and I'd tighten it up and practice trying to get quarters to bounce on it like he wanted me to, and we played our war games, and I was a typical guy. I was lucky for this fact, and most people that are listening, if they're not as old as dirt like me, and you're getting up there too, it looks like.
Yeah, I figured it out, 14 years on me.
Okay. Well, when I was a kid, besides the fact my father, who, by the way, when he got out of the Marine Corps, and he was on the Missouri when they signed the surrender. I got a certificate proving that for him.
Right.
However, every one of my uncles had served in World War II as well. Every one of them. My grandfather served in World War I. And when I'm 12 years old, and one of my most vivid memories was going to his little old house, because he had come back, became alcoholic. I mean, it was just, they didn't have help for people back then. And he had been there, Anyway, he was in France, and they had a gas attack. His gas mask was frozen to the ground enough to where he couldn't get it on right away.
Right.
So his lungs got burnt. And when I'm 12 years old and 13, and no other kids I've ever talked to are that age had to do this, but I would pound on his back to release that phlegm. That was my job.
Really? Wow.
And I saw that. And he died at age 63 in the same VA hospital that I go to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
And when I went to that, I'm 13 when he died, and the smell in that place at that time, and it was spooky, and I'm just a young kid, and I'm seeing that. So I have a fair idea of what the cost of freedom is. Mm-hmm. And that's something we'll talk about hopefully later, of what that comes to and what it really means. So I would say that I was fortunate growing up, and I had a lot of good times. In America at that point, my dad was a packing house worker, worked hard, and we went right along with him. Mm-hmm. I was scrawny, like I told you. However, we're trying to make a living. My mom stayed home, and it was like, dual income thing, so everything counted. And we worked off, as a family, we worked off our coal bill, for heating the house, right, through the lumber yard. I unloaded coal with my father and my brothers every weekend through the winter for $1 a ton. We took this coal out of a boxcar. My dad was strong enough. He built a ramp and a run to get on that. He opened up both doors in the middle of the boxcar, built a runway in the back, and had a ramp going up into the bin. And he had about a 3-foot wide bucket thing with handles on it. And he would ram that thing up there, and all day long. And it's 80 ton. Right. We'd unload an 80 ton boxcar on a weekend. Well, what am I going to do? Not that, but all of my brothers, he would lay planks on each side of that ramp, and we carried pieces of coal as big as we could handle, one by one by one.
Right. That's
the good news. The bad news is that this coal is oiled down. And when you would move it, so there'd be some that wouldn't get oiled, the dust from the coal, it would carry that with it. And it wouldn't really fly in the air, but we would end up, at the end of a weekend, I'd have mascara on my eyes.
Right.
And I couldn't wash it off. It was oil-based. So I caught all kinds of crap.
Let alone what's going in your lungs.
Yeah, well, let alone, that. Yeah, we don't even want to go into it. Maybe we should. But
nobody's pounding on your back right now.
With all of these toxins, the talk of toxins, I've freaked out the VA from just incidentally talking about all the toxins I've been exposed to in the military and out.
Right.
But anyway, that's how I grew up with this value. And if you look at sociology, and I hate to say it kind of because I'm proud of my military service, I'm an educator also. You know, I was a faculty member at Black Hill State and USD. So I've had my fair share of courses in sociology and things. So I have somewhat idea of what the working class is all about.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived that. And that was me.
Yeah.
My dad worked hard all week, but he'd have a good time partying a little bit with his old Army buddies.
Oh, yeah.
On the weekend.
How could you not do that?
How could you not do that?
You know, especially with the support factor back then. That was your support factor.
It was it.
Really.
I can still remember a lot of my uncles, people did it back then when you didn't have a lot of money. They were still wearing their khaki pants, you know, and just kind of living just like guys that just got out and they're trying to put a family together. And that's just how I was fortunate in that way.
Right.
Yeah.
So then with the high school, and you had a military father, good work values, Vietnam was rolling.
Ooh.
So did you plan to go in? How was it that you ended up going to Vietnam? And then you can expound on some of those stories.
Okay, and yes, thanks for asking that, because it's important to tell that story. Mm-hmm. Maybe not all of it, but at least enough where people know what was happening to these old dogs. So I graduated in high school in 1968, like I said. I'd already attended 2 funerals before I ever got out of high school.
Really?
2 guys, one from my confirmation class and another one from the high school class, a year older than me. So my come to Jesus moment had taken place long before the day I graduated, because I knew, the writing was on the wall. Now, I had no fear of going, but things happened so fast. They got your number, and they know what So before I know it, 2 things happened. My father took me to Orange City, Iowa, and we were both a little somber on the way there to go register for the draft.
Right.
And I think he knew that he had raised his sons to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. So enough said there. Right. And he was a quiet man. He didn't have to talk a lot about it. So I get that done. Before you know it, I do have my draft notice. Yeah. Uh-oh.
I think I know the number.
Rally time.
112?
Yes, 112.
That's in the book.
Oh, wow. So I get this number, and, it's going to happen. Well, I'm attending, due to go in like January or get around there in February. And I went to a Thanksgiving family celebration, and there I saw one of on my wife's side at the time, family uncle, who had been in Vietnam, and I saw him walking down these steps. Now, I'd heard of him, but I'd never seen him before, and he was walking down those steps on prosthesis.
Right.
He was in the Air Force, and I know you were in the Air Force, but he was in a chopper, and it got shot down, and he wasn't picked up for 3 days, and he developed gangrene in his legs and had both legs off at the knee. Mm. But he was making it down those steps. And I went over to him like a magnet,
Right.
I go, I got my draft notice. What should I do? What should I do here? Because I knew my dad was a grunt, but I was getting drafted in the Army. And by the way, I got to back up and tell you one thing real quick. My father was such a, kind of like, I ended up taking after him without wanting to. He got out of the Army in Marine Corps and joined the Army just for a relaxing thing to do, and went to Korea.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so he was, so I had no problem with the Army, but, anyway, we sit at the table by ourselves for a while, and he said, here's what you need to do. You need to get in the medical field, son, because they'll take care of you. And what he was envisioning is what happened to him as an Air Force man,
right,
getting wounded. He gets flown out of country, goes to Guam, and stays in that hotel and sees every military person around him wearing a white smock.
Right.
Clean.
Mm-hmm.
He said, get in the medical field, son. So, of course, I did.
And little did he or you know
or no.
the rest of
'Cause
the story.
Right here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, I DD-Mao, that's what term in Vietnam for getting over there. I take off to the recruiter's office because you're not gonna, if you take the draft for 2 years, you're gonna be a grunt or you're gonna do whatever they want you to, and that's the end of it. But if you enlisted for 3 years, and you could choose your school,
Right.
which is what I needed to do. So right here at Sioux Falls, a place I used to drill in the reserves later, the guy, I found out later that these recruiters, they have quotas, and they know they can guide you to what you. So he goes, well, what do you like to do? And I said, well, I kind of like biology. Well, then we'll make you a lab tech. I didn't know what a lab tech was.
Right.
I found out, though. I go through basic, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Get my time. I go to Fort Sam Houston, Texas. And then things started taking a life of its own where I'm wondering, why am I in combat medic school here? That's because they made everybody go through that first. Then you went to your advanced training.
Mm-hmm.
So I go to the advanced training during the height of the draft, probably.
Mm-hmm.
56 people in the graduating class. 8 got orders for Vietnam, and I was one of those 8.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is where things, I was just talking to a guy about this yesterday because he had saw a documentary about it. It's pretty hard on a guy's ego when you're old enough to be part of history. Woo.
Wear it like a badge, Larry.
You got to. You got to. So there I was, trained as a combat medic, also as a lab tech, and I'm assigned to the first CAF, second of the 8th. Well, I go through that, and I will say right now, before if we do get into anything else, I have to say this. It's sane people in an insane situation. And when you're a medic, things are up close and personal, and that's about enough for now. Mm-hmm. But I want to get into one part of that that leads to, and that's this, that there was a time at night when I'm working on somebody, and I got done with what I had to do, and that next day I said out loud, nobody was there to hear me, I said, they didn't train me for this. And it wasn't about clear the airways, stop the bleeding, dress the wound, treat for shock. I can do that.
Right.
This had to deal with a drug problem over there.
Mm-hmm.
So I pull my duties, my time, 10 months. And it's I get a call in when we come back off a rotation and from the field, Tentinger, report to the HQ. So I go there, and here they're pulling me out of the unit because I have to go back to the first CAV at the time had their base in Benoit, which was farther south than that. Than they were further, north. We were soldiers, and that was up years before when they were up north. So I'm there, and I go from Benoit, the air base, over to Long Bend. Pretty nice digs compared to where I was before.
Right.
And that's when I found out I was part of a big plan. A big plan.
Cleaning house?
Yeah. At the end of 10 months, the 8 corpsmen, or the medics that went over, 4 were still kicking. 4 of us were still alive.
Right.
Vietnam was divided into 4 quadrants, and I was part of the first drug testing program. I think it was anyway, because I sure never heard of it before.
Right.
And I flew on a chopper, get up in the morning, a second lieutenant, be there, our medical officer, 2 chopper pilots, our warrant officers, door gunner, and me. And we'd fly unannounced, level weapons on our own people at Firebase, take urine tests from everybody, and then I used my lab tech skills. They had this thing with brand new technology. We called it a FRAT machine, free radical assay technique, and it analyzed the concentration of morphine in the urine. When a body would take, and there was also another subtest where you could, the THC, because we had hashish or marijuana
Right.
laced with God only knows what, and there's plenty of that too. So that's where I lived for 2 months, doing this type of thing, flying in and out, doing these tests. Around, at least for me, where I was at, 10% of everybody tested positive. Now that's officers, that's you as senior enlisted. It doesn't matter. It was just the numbers were there, and so that's a big problem.
Do you think the word got around? Communication was maybe not great, but do you think the word got around word of mouth that people are coming in testing, or they maybe didn't even care?
Well, before this was, I forget where I was at there in country, but it wasn't in on with my unit, but it was. Some guy comes up to me and asks me to take a piss for him in a piss thing, because there was somebody else was testing something somewhere else too. I wasn't the only guy doing this. So it was a turmoil, and they were everybody was hooked. I didn't go to the funeral, but when I got back, another guy that was over there, I graduated from high school with, he came back hooked on heroin and wrapped his car around a pole coming back from Omaha, he got killed, coming back because he was so stoned. That's such a bad, terrible thing.
Right.
Well, I get through this time and, my last 2 months in country, and I just asked the CO, because I had my DRO's papers, I was getting ready to head out, could I see where all these people end up in this thing? I suppose. So I went to TC Hill, and that was a place outside of Long Bend. It was a converted stockade, and they converted this into a place for rehab. So I go into to their the drying out detox area, and it was a Quonset hut, small one, 3 beds on each side. And they had patient restrainers there, soft arm patient restrainers, and they just tied them down for 3 days, let them dry out, cold turkey. Then they put them in the Bay Area to go for 2 weeks, and then they'd send them back to the unit. And if they got caught again, they were kicked out. So
I read that part in the book.
Yeah.
So my first question was, how good of a cleaning period is that? Is it even near long enough? And did most of them, it's hard to know this, want to get caught a second time?
Well,
was it worth it for them to get away from the war, or were there any repercussions of being kicked
either
out?
Fortunately or unfortunately. I can give you a true life example to answer that question. I leave this Quonset hut with the people are restrained. I go around the backside of this big bay area where the prisoners used to be, and I walk in. The second bed on the left, I look down, and there is a guy I graduated from high school with. I don't have to say his name, but there he was. And I graduated from West Sioux and Hayward, and there was 100 people in my class, baby boomers. So there's 50 guys. What's the chances of me seeing it? There he was. He's sitting there. And he had been busted and caught. My area was from the Central Highlands down to the Mekong Delta. So he was south of the Delta. And his plan of action was to go down and get caught again and get kicked out. So the whole thing, when you're trying to set up a rehab program and you're scrambling and you got a bigger mission ahead of you anyhow, and the whole thing was chaos, it doesn't surprise me that things were that screwed up. But that's the way it was.
Yeah, because you look at getting kicked out, but possibly saving my life, but then a dishonorable discharge, I presume.
Yeah.
Weighing the differences of, how much was that going to hurt me on the way,
the
rest of my life? And
right.
I couldn't imagine being in those situations.
Well, it was a time when, it's hopefully we'll never have anything quite like that again. But I think it's great that we get a chance to just talk about it a little bit. I have to tell you, I checked my ego in at the door a long time ago. I'm an old timer now. I go to the VA and I look at all these people and I go, how could they be in Vietnam? they were. And we're just getting out there, like you used to hear about the World War II people. They're getting to be older,
Right.
fewer. I'm 73, still here, but all of us have to face that time when someday there will not be enough Vietnam veterans around to really tell the story of what it was like to be left behind. I could tell you, if you'd care to, let's share one little thing with that. I come back from Vietnam, I land in Sioux City, and I'm going to surprise my parents. So I have my Class A's on, and I'm carrying my duffel bag, and I get out of Sioux City, and I'm walking mile after mile. I can take anybody to the spot where I finally gave up, set my duffel bag down, went to the nearest farmhouse and called for a ride home. Now that's not as terrible as other Vietnam vets had it, but that I'm in a uniform and it was look the other way. I don't want to think about this.
Plenty of traffic. Nobody stops.
Nobody stopped me. Well, getting ahead of myself just a little bit. Life goes on, which we'll talk about, some of that. And I do find myself getting back in the service and going to Desert Storm. And I make it through that. And we had one scud blow up above us, and that was about it. And treated a few people, a lot of more prisoners than anything, when we round them up. Well, lo and behold, after that tour of duty, where do I end up? I'm flying back into Sioux City, Iowa again. And I have my dress blues on, and I look behind, I look out the window before they built the airports like they are now, just a tarmac out there.
Right.
And I see all these balloons, and I see people gathered around, and I look behind me, and there's an 18-year-old that must have just got out of basic from the Air Force. He's in his, uniform.
Right.
So I thought, well, that's nice. Well, I go out of that plane, and I'm one of the last ones. I'm just hanging out there waiting. And I come in, and there in that Sioux City airport were about 10 or 12 Vietnam vets lined up on each side of me with a sign at the very end saying, "Welcome home, Vietnam vet, it's about time."
Right.
Now, how they found out that I was ever on that plane, because all I had done is went from wherever to Chicago, but they tracked that manifest, found out my service record somehow, and made a life-changing moment for me, where welcome home, Vietnam vet, it's about time.
That's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure.
Yep. And they continue.
Yeah.
It's grown.
Right. So maybe I'm talking too much, I don't know, but I just got to tell you
No, not at all.
The story of what it means in service, to our country. And this is the reality, and I defy anyone to prove me wrong on this. When you join the military, it changes you. And I could say, if long as you're open and let it can change you for the better, even though it might screw you up from time to time.
Right.
But there's something about serving the greater good. If you're raised to that point where you feel that. Now I know that because I've had my share of problems up here, the old noggin. I got to fight every day, and the VA keeps calling them my new normal, and I'll take it for what it is.
Right.
However, it's something bigger than yourself, and if we ever lose that, we're going to be eroded to the point where we can't make it. So I'm just glad to still be going
right
that way.
Yeah, and I like to believe that even some people that weren't raised that way, that maybe had other reasons to go into the military, that they can gain some of that as well, without having having it from a small age on up.
Yeah.
But and just on a small scale, I've noticed, and I told my daughters this too, that you can be in the military doing some grunt stuff, what have you, but I've had the opportunity to be put in a leadership position, nothing big, but you're leading this small group, and to me, it just felt like you got a little stronger, you could take a little more crap, and it just elevates you some, and just like you said, being part of that something larger than yourself.
Yeah.
But you're also responsible at whatever level for some people.
Yeah.
And I think that helps grow and gain some of that within yourself.
Another lesson I share with people with that, in addition to all those good things, the skills that you learn, leadership being one of the most paramount, as far as you come out of that young person and you've already led men. You've run a team like you did in the Air Force. You got work to get, you got responsibilities, and you have to delegate, but you also have to take the ultimate responsibility. Things that people that just live their day-to-day life or even go to college and get out thinking they can conquer the world, they have no clue of what real life means and getting something done in the business world, because the military does hone a person, makes you or breaks you kind of, but you build into that sense of camaraderie, working with teams, but also getting the job done. And one of the areas that tie right into that, and I like letting young people know about it if they're hesitant about joining, I said, well, think of the bigger picture. You can serve your country, but once you're out, you have things that other people can't even come close to paying for. Money, the skills, and I tell them the story of myself where I come back from Vietnam as a medic, and I was in a situation where I had to make decisions that there was nobody else around. And granted, I'd lived all these other jobs, lugging beef and packing plants, carpenter work, heavy equipment. I mean, I did it all. However, I still had that basis of what it took me always to work with in the medical field. Mm-hmm. Well, lo and behold, one day, a lot of times the best things happen in life when you don't suck up. Well, I helped my sister-in-law who lost her luggage coming into Sioux City. When I drove all the way there and got the luggage and got back, talking to her, just did a favor. And we just were talking, and I said, what is your husband doing? He said, well, he's on an oil rig in Nigeria. Really? What is that? So she started describing it. And then she said, yeah, it's like its own community. They have people that do laundry. They have cooks. They have medical people. Whoa. They have medical people on that oil rig? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Then the lights come on, because at this point, I'm lugging beef at a packing plant. I'm farming a little, going broke during the Carter administration. The interest rates are 18% mm-hmm. and all that. Well, I haven't. One person contacts another for me, and I find out about this company out of Texas, Dallas, Texas, SEDCO, Southeastern Drilling Corporation, and they were looking for medics. And here I went down and applied, and I go there, and I had to get the job, I had to be an EMT. I had to have some credentials. Well, because of all my medical training that stuck with me forever, long story short, I went through Western Iowa Tech in Sioux City, Iowa, and became the first person, they said, to ever pass the EMT exam without taking the course.
I believe it.
Or passing. I mean, I went and looked at an ambulance before I went to make sure I knew where stuff was, but I passed the written exam and the practical, had all that done. I go to the interview down in Dallas, Texas, and I was hired ahead. There was 3 of us in the final running, and I was hired ahead of 2 people with degrees in medical field, like PAs, and they had all this clinical training, but they wanted somebody who could do it without having to be told or being watched over your shoulder. And that's what the military does for you.
So were you the only technician on there, or
Yeah.
did you work with a couple?
No, I was the only medic.
So that's probably why, because
Yeah.
under pressure by yourself,
Right.
maybe limited supplies.
Oh, and I could, I'm a storyteller, so look out. This could take a while. But one of my first experiences that just showed, what has to happen, what you can do, is we worked 28 days straight in Nigeria on an oil rig off the coast, and then we had 28 days off, back and forth. So after my first hitch, I come back to the oil rig, and these guys are still kind of checking me out. I'm the only person from the northern part of the United States.
Right.
These are oil field trash, rednecks. They're all from Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and here I'm from South Dakota. They go, oh, what's he doing here? Well, what happened, because we were 500 miles from the nearest hospital of any kind, we were offshore, and then we had a standby boat that has to be legally near us within earshot with a radio in case there's an accident or a fire to get us off the oil rig. Well, on that workboat, it was called, we had 8 40,000-pound anchors that were drawn up to 200,000 pounds tension each.
Wow.
With a 3-inch cable on the seabed. That's what they were drilling, because it was a semi-submersible that was floating. Well, they went to pull these anchors to get us moved to the next spot. And the captain of the ship was new, and you got the rudders, he was gunning it and moving, and it was kind of fishtailing in the back. He was trying to pull this 40,000-pound anchor out of about 20 feet of mud at the seabed.
Right.
Anyway, this 3-inch cable caught on the back handrail of the boat. And the second mate, there's the first mate, but then there's a second mate, I found out. He must have been new, because he went back there to see what was going on. And that had just become a danger zone.
Right.
Well, he got back there, and this cable come unsnapped from the rail and hit him alongside of this side of his face here. It busted his jaw, all the teeth in his mouth, caved his chest in, and he's laying there in a pool of blood.
My word.
They call me. I'm the only medic.
Only one.
Only one. So they take a crane with a basket thing, and they haul me down. Now everything is moving. The rig is moving. The boat's moving. Everything is just like that. So I get down there, and this guy is just laying in a pool of blood. So I had brought with me, suspecting the worst, a scoop stretcher, which is it's a stretcher you can pick apart and then crank it together. So I had no other equipment really, as far as IVs are concerned, but I could at least stop some of the bleeding, and I could feel that his intestinal injury, the stomach was getting bigger,
right?
Because it was getting full of blood. But I got his airway cleared, because when he busted the jaw, all the teeth, it prevented him from breathing. So we load him up, and I call for a chopper, just like I would a medevac in Vietnam. The only thing is, out there in the civilian world, we work for the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. They didn't have a chopper standing by for something like that. Well, on the radio frequencies, the Shell Oil chopper heard the signal and landed by a miracle, I think. At the same time, the crane picked me up, and this guy loaded us on, got to the helipad to drop us back on the rig. The chopper landed. We load this guy in the chopper, and it was, like Yogi Berra says, deja vu all over again, because here I am in a chopper, and this was a small one, so the doors were open on each side.
Right.
So I got a guy bleeding to death. His heart rate was like a little rabbit, just barely going, and his air, he was still breathing, but with the blood loss, that I was trying to stop. I could tell it was not going good because of the abdominal internal injuries. So I just, through all the hollering in the back, I said, take me to the nearest hospital, wherever that is. And he took me to, and it was called the Eku Baptist Hospital, out in the jungle. Some doctor had retired evidently and just dedicated his life to being out there, taking care of people. And when we landed in this village, we went on the back. I took the stretcher and put it on the, like an old school bus. We just put him across the top seats of some old bus, and we bounced into the hospital area. Mm-hmm. And when we took him off and had the guys load him up and bring him in there, you could see the dirt path on the floor of the hospital with the screen busted out. I mean, it was just, and I remember it so clearly because the doc had just put somebody under anesthesia, and the person was laying on their side. They must have done some kind of epidural block. But then he saw what was going on here, and he came over, and I turned him over, that person. Well, getting back to the original thing of where the military makes a difference, I come back to the rig covered in blood from here, because there was an artery hit, whatever, but I was covered in blood. Mm-hmm. And from that day on, I was golden on that rig because they knew that this guy is going to be able to take care of me.
And the guy lived?
He lived. He was in intensive care. I was a medic radio operator, so I was able to keep in communication with our base camp that checked on the hospital. He was in the hospital for over 32 days. He was from the Philippines, and he left that hospital.
Wow.
So, and it was all because of military training, because I had no other, that was it. Mm-hmm. It was that mindset of the focus it takes. And yeah, it's great to have somebody to tell you what to do, so you can follow orders. But when you have to make a decision on your own, you need a little experience first before you do that. And that's what the military can give you.
Right. So how old were you when that was going on, when you were working on that?
I was in my 30s.
30s. And you worked there how long?
I was 6 years on this oil rig.
6 years, 28 days on and off for 6 years.
Now, okay, that's a whole...
Well, one other thing.
Yeah.
You talked about the blood a few times. Now, you in the book you mentioned something about the blood on how it bothered you at first, but then it changed or something.
It changed. I guess when I was a kid, and I'd see blood, it's just like anybody, normal reaction. But I'll tell you this, from right now for the rest of my life, it happened then. To me, blood is connective tissue, and I can disassociate myself totally from that blood and from anything else that surrounds it, I think. And I didn't realize the good, bad, or ugly of that until years later. I'd just come back from Desert Storm, and I was at USD and running a peer education group, and they had like a week-long training to get people used to doing with this. And somebody came in and talked about how we all wear a mask. And sometimes we hide behind it, sometimes we show it off. So they laid you down, you had to put plaster Paris over you just kind of got quiet, and then you'd pull that mask off, and you had to tell about that mask.
Wow.
And that's when I found out that I didn't know aware of it, but I was behind a mask. I could turn, when guts start flowing, I just immediately turn the switch off and become all business. And I should have had a hint of that. No one ever told that to me, except one time when I was back, I was on an EMT on the ambulance crew in Akron, and a good old farmer out, everybody knew, got his hand caught in a corn picker. And some people would run to the ambulance on a volunteer crew so they could drive because they didn't want to be in the back.
Right.
Necessarily. But that's where I wanted to be. So I get there and I do all the debreeding, and I'm taking this and got a part of a finger here. To me it was nothing. But we got a common practice is to decompress and talk about the procedure. And that's when some of the people on the crew noticed that I just showed no emotion.
Right.
So I've lived with that. And I would say even as I got older, some of that was necessary. And I would say as I even got in the leadership role, I would say I did show some emotion then. Once in a while, if I had to get these guys in shape,
Right.
with the troop. But we'll talk about that if we have time now or later, of what life was like, a long time after that. But yes, to me, it was a good thing in that regard, because it helps you survive. And that's a challenge when you're young, especially, and you're put in a situation where you do have to do things that you shouldn't have to do.
Right.
But we do take that bigger calling to heart, and that's what I commend every service member anytime I ever am around people, especially in this, like the Alliance where we're sitting right now. And if anybody is wondering what it's like to see a place in a city where people honor veterans, come here to the Alliance.
This is it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I noticed something in the book on how you were talking about being able to flick the switch, be business only. The thing you mentioned in the book was you could be right in that blood, straight in it, because when it's still warm, there's still a chance.
Yes.
And that was part of that switch. And then
That's
once
part
it
of that
wasn't warm
switch.
anymore, then the switch would go the other way.
But that's real. But on the other side, and I hope no one has to do it, is when you're working with someone, a brother, and you feel the blood turn cold. That's something else that you don't know. You can see what that cost, that cost and that price of freedom of what it is. And we could talk for an hour of what I went through and felt like when I went to the wall. I've been there twice.
Right.
The first time it was to the guys I told you about. I went to their funeral before I ever went over. And then the second time, in my unit. And that's not just rhetoric and not just pictures. It becomes real, and it's in a way that we just owe it to ourselves to not let that be forgotten.
So with going through these stories, as far as the chronology of it, and I've been contacting a guy down in Texas to see if we can have you on his podcast before we even birthed this. But I went through, and you sent me some information and a lot of the bullet statements of your life, which is pretty amazing. But just give a little chronology of, okay, we've talked about, your high school, going into Vietnam, you got out, and then just kind of list from there the jobs and the ages until turning that corner and raising that hand again.
Yeah, well,
So that people have a time frame involved, in their brain of your stories.
I won't be able to hit on all of them because this is something I found out when I first came back from my third deployment, and I was kind of broke, and they sent me to a group thing at the vet center, which I'm not a group guy. I didn't attend more, but that session, it just so happened the guy leading it was a combat medic like me. So he got it. I mean, we understood each other, but also the whole big picture of it being a war of attrition, and you took ground, but you never kept it, and it was body counts. And I can still tell you, as a 19-year-old, turning in a body count and seeing it and being right there with the radio operator and hearing it being inflated, things like that. But a comment was made, the average number of jobs, because we're all pushing 70, 60, 70, is about 14 jobs. Well, I went through all of my jobs, and I had 14. I went from, it's just restlessness, or I don't know what it is. However, I went through that period of I come back, and I'm just a young guy, broke, trying to make a living. I find any job I can get, any day work. I'm just wouldn't say out of touch with the world, but I definitely wasn't established in anything. So I would take on any kind of menial hard labor. I later got a job running heavy equipment. I love that. Big scrapers.
Oh yeah.
That's all good.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And then I worked a few just little jobs in small towns. However, the big job that I'll never forget, and I say it's any job I'll ever have the rest of my life is easy. I was a beef lugger at Iowa Beef Packers. And we had 45 minutes to unload 40,000 pounds of meat on our quarters of beef on our shoulders, 5 minutes to get a drink of water, and back in the truck again. Mm-hmm. I went 1 year with 3 Saturdays off. That's it. And it drove me into the ground. However, it will, like I said, any job I'll ever do was easy.
Yeah.
Compared to that.
Like you say, you don't say it's working out, it's training, and that was quite a freezing cold, rock hard meat training year.
Yeah. So from there, my brothers and we farmed my grandfather's land. I actually, up until the day I retired and called it a day overall, I can never remember having just one job at one time. It was always 2. Always trying to get enough sleep to make it to the next one. And that's just, we haven't talked much about personal life, but I'm a family man, and I think we all owe it as protectors of our families to do what we can, not rely on necessarily others. So I did. Whether it was the Navy Reserve when I was, just trying to make ends meet, and from all these jobs of working, tool dyeing, you name it, just always anything with my hands that I could do. And I didn't use my medical skills that much as far as looking for a job that way, because it just, at that time, if you weren't a doctor, it didn't pay enough to make a living, but you could if you were willing to get out there and do construction work.
Right.
And during this time when I was farming too and losing money, raising hogs, trying to keep things going, that's when my brother talked me into joining the Navy Reserve.
And you were what age at this time? Pretty approximately.
About 39. Yeah, so I went through my 20s when I came back, all, working all these packing plant jobs and construction jobs and little jobs in towns, just making it. But when I get in my 30s, I'm still, my kids are getting older. I got to try and come up with a way of keep getting them through school and getting the things that need to be done. So when I'm around 38 or so, I listened to my brother, who he had it made when we were both drafted a week apart. He became a Seabee in the Navy Reserve, and I joined him because I had medical background. I went on this advanced pay grade. They immediately put me in as an E5, and I'm in there. That's kind of like a junior NCO type thing.
Right.
And I'm in maybe 6 or 8 months, and what do you think happens? Desert storm. And I found out that the Navy works things a little different than the Army.
Do they now?
In the Army, you're in a unit. Everybody gets to assemble in a big hall and wave goodbye. Not with the Navy. If you're in a reserve unit, you're mobilized by individual readiness rating.
Right.
I'll give you one guess who had the highest readiness rating in the Midwest when Desert Storm took place. I had all these quals on the weapons and this and that, so bang, I get that thing, they call it the balloon, went up on the 25th of August. I got my orders on the 26th of August, and I'm on a plane on the 28th of August.
Yeah.
That quick. And they don't do it that way anymore, but thank God I had they call it a sea bag in the Navy. I had it packed, ready to go no matter what.
Yep.
Yeah. So
I had a guy in my shop that was that way. all the time. Always had a bag ready to go. Part-time guy, Air Force, and he had a smaller one ready to go all the time. But when it got to be, he would pack the rest of his clothes like 3 weeks early. The bag sitting by the door, ready to roll. So you did mention the training, and the powerlifting when you were really young.
Oh.
We'll go to that subject for a little while.
Okay.
And what were your ages and what were some of the accomplishments? Because it was pretty amazing.
Well, as I might have said earlier, what doesn't kill you, make you stronger. I had a couple opportunities there to get stronger. And I began in my adult life, I think it was just that tenacity of lugging beef and packing plants and just working. I had no problem training hard. And that just brought more and more results as far as being able to lift heavy.
Right.
And I got to think about the years here. I will say I've had about 3 or 4 lives in powerlifting. And the younger ones, even when I was lugging beef, I'd pull out on a weekend and go bench 300 pounds somewhere just to go, a bench press competition without any training. Because I was still lifting hard. Well, when I was 44 years old. This is my first big hoorah back into it. I'm at USD, and I go up to the gym, in the Dakota Dome. And on a Thursday, I see a little thing posted on the bulletin board, South Dakota Powerlifting Championships this Saturday. So this is Thursday. And I thought, that might be kind of fun to do.
Right.
At least I'll go into the bench press part anyway. So I go down to the nearest medical scale, and I'm weighing 174 and a half. Now, I wanted to be in the 165-pound weight class because that's what I used to compete at before. So at Thursday night, I used all my wrestling weight loss torture skills.
Using tons of energy.
Yeah, to get down to the 165-pound weight class. And I get to the meet. It was here in Sioux Falls. I get to the meet at 7 o'clock. Lo and behold, I'm a pound over.
1 pound.
1 pound, so I got to go lose this weight. So I go to the nearest gym, and I get on this exercise bike, and I burn that pound off. I come back, and I weigh in, and I make it. My brother was going to lift off for me on this bench press, and I had planned on breaking 300, for sure. But I told him, I said, maybe I should try my opener here in the back room, make sure I don't bomb out, because if you miss in powerlifting, if you can't get that first attempt, you can always go up, but you can never go down. That's just the law.
Right.
So here I was doing my opening lift of 310 or whatever in the warm-up room, and a lot of these people thought that I was just using a light warm-up, so they upped the good people. They upped their opener to a point where they didn't get it. They bombed out.
Oh, man.
So I went, and here I'm 100% novice. So after my first attempt, and then I go to the second attempt, and I get that at 320. Then this guy comes up to me, and I don't think they allow this anymore, but the prison had a team, and this guy brings his bench press shirt over to me. I'd never even heard of that in my life. And he said, "You got us all beat anyhow. I noticed you're just doing this raw. Here, put this thing on." And I put that thing on without being such, and I ended up benching like 336 or 340. I broke the national record right there at the meet.
Oh, my word.
At my weight class and age division.
Right.
However, it wouldn't count unless you were at the national competition to do it. So I gathered up my stuff, and I began a career of going. I went to the national meet and won that. Then I went here, kept going, and finally I found myself on the Armed Forces powerlifting team. And then it just took off from there. And here I am, maybe about 50. And believe it or not, I gained enough weight. I went to the 181-pound weight class with the same body fat. I just became a maniac training. So that would be when I was maybe at the most 48 years old, 50. And I still, to this day, that's the weight class that I held my same body weight now for about 25 years. Mm-hmm. I still train. I had, both shoulders and both knees replaced, but we don't have to talk about that. Just a little too much wear and tear overall.
Now, did you live in Alcester for a while?
Yeah.
And it seemed to me that you had a training technique where people would see you doing something out on the streets and think you're needing help.
Yes.
What am I talking about here?
Well, I had read this book about dinosaur training, and it's training the way the strongmen did in the 20s and 30s. So instead of using what's called a chrome and fern, being in a nice gym with all the good equipment, I would throw railroad ties, do whatever it took, and my favorite one was to get a car and push it around the block.
With your wife at the wheel?
With my wife at the wheel. And it was, I got to where I finally could get to where I could take a 14-passenger van when I was really training hard and push that up a slight incline. That was fun.
Oh, my word.
However, but kind of a funny thing that went along with this, I had, because I was hitting these national records and things, and I was at USD in the Health and Physical Education Department, they used that. So I got a little bit of, TV time here and there. And the word got out, and I received a call one day, and I couldn't understand this person's voice, but here she was an exchange student from Taiwan and was looking for a powerlifting coach. And I take her and begin training her. The government paid for her way to come over here to train, and I became her coach. She had a coach back in Taiwan, but I was the one, here. And we went to competitions, and she was beating any man, and she was just a little bit on. I think she was on the juice. However, I brought her parent. The government paid for her trip, her parents to come to Beersford, and we fed them our normal breakfast. And it was like us eating squid or something. They were picking at it. They didn't like it.
Right.
However, this Joan was her name. She wanted to show her parents what she could do in my training. So I'm out there doing just like a good drill instructor would. I'm pushing her with this car. We're taking her around this street with a slight incline, and she's pushing this car and pushing it and pushing it. Finally, I made her go a little faster. She dropped from exhaustion.
No.
Right on the pavement. But who would drive by right then but the town police? And here they see a car stopped in the middle of the road with a girl, Oriental girl, laying face down on the pavement.
Oh, man.
So I would say that type of old, good school training was a good positive thing. And I just had kind of fun with that my whole, life, that way.
Yeah. Paul was telling me that people would stop by and just thinking you trying to get your car home and always offer help and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Nope, just training.
Just training. And I would say that when I was in Alcester, I did my student teaching in Alcester. Mm-hmm. I was a non-traditional student, and it was great because I had enough experiences and things. When I went and taught the 9th grade health class, they didn't have a textbook for it at the time. So I just pulled my own curriculum together and started working with that. But my fun thing was that anytime a student wanted to challenge me, they had to do it too, but I'd drop down to 100 push-ups. Mm-hmm. Then, okay, now what do you got? And I, but I just got to tell you that my whole powerlifting experiences transferred into a life in the military that made a difference with the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. It's pretty much an honor to be able to, at this, we're going to talk about my life nowadays, later. But I am heading out on the 13th of July, and I'm going to the change of command ceremony for the 23rd Regiment of the 4th Marine Division, because I want to be there to tell these young corpsmen what it takes to go into combat. It's been 20 years since 2003 when we were over there, when it was really, it was tough after that, I know, because I was there then too. Mm-hmm. However, training and just living out what we believe in, kind of 24/7, is maybe it's just something that hopefully other people kind of get that and know that that's what it takes, and that's what's the good part of living out those true values of honor, courage, and commitment. And we can do that, in and out of uniform. We can do it with our families. We can do it with our associates, people, colleagues that we work with. And I think it's like a win-win, because then we have a situation where we're setting an example for younger people. We're giving someone that others can rely on, and they can count on us. So if we don't do it, who else will?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So what we've done is we've had your introduction,
Yeah.
and you told us about your younger years, your fights with your brothers.
Yeah.
You finally winning that very well,
Yeah.
not stopping until you were ready to stop. Then getting into the military, the Vietnam area, stuff about your dad, instilling those values, keeping those values through your 20s and 30s, struggling financially, doing, never just one job at a time, doing the hard jobs,
Right.
choosing the hard jobs,
Mm-hmm.
and then talked about your brother. You say talked you into re-enlisting.
And
I didn't get any of that out of the book here.
Oh.
But because you can't tell everything there. But
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was a, you and your brother had spoke about doing that, and the age you were at. when you made that
with the
decision.
age, I got another little,
Yeah.
I'm a storyteller. I can't help it, like
I
I
love
told
it.
you before. So I find myself, I'm mobilized for Desert Storm. Boom. Immediately. I'm at Camp Lejeune at the hospital. Now, I really feel that the whole Desert Storm thing was a big experiment. How many thousands of people can we mobilize and make it happen? Because they didn't need that many over there. What happened is around 100 medical people left the hospital, and 400 of us showed up. And it was way too many, like a burden. But we were in so much better condition to do things than those young enlisted people. Can you imagine? I'm a paramedic. I got all this experience. I'm replacing some person that just got out of a little 8-week school.
Mm-hmm.
I was a professor, and I was doing music, training. So anyway, when you're in the military, you got to take the PT test twice a year. And I'm all about that. So, I got mobilized right away, August 26th. So before I head over to Saudi and Iraq, I got to take the PT test in October. So it's when you do it, like in the Navy, it's not as bad as some other branches. You got your push-ups, sit-ups, run a mile and a half, body fat composition, but it's age adjusted to where you have to pass, but they do give you a little bit of a leeway.
Yeah, the Air Force had that scale also.
Okay, so here out there, all these people, most of them are active duty when I'm out there with them. So they go, everybody, you got to run, like you got to get 80 push-ups or something, 64 was the max. So let's say you have to get 40 or 50 push-ups if you're 18. How many people here are 18 and older? Then they go 20 and over, 30 and over. People raise their hand, 40 and over. And I'm the only one out of the whole 100, the only one that's 40
Right.
at that point, or over 40, So I've got used to being older than dirt. I said, yeah, I ran my first PT test with Moses, that day.
Wearing a robe.
Yeah. So that's how I took that. And someday, well, when we get together again, I hope we get a chance to talk about what happened later. I went through my time in the Navy Reserve and worked my way up the ranks just from, being a little award here and an award there, but still just pushing. But when 9/11 happened, which we'll cover, next time, that's when my world changed forever.
Right.
Like along with most other people.
Yeah. So that is what we'll cover in part 1. And I knew talking with you when I met you the first time, and then when we started talking about doing this, try to get you to Texas. We haven't got a call on that, but then we're like, we're going to do this because this podcast is pretty new. This will be probably the 5th one. And by the way, this is the 3rd of July, so it's fitting that we're doing this right the day before one of the days that means the most to you and all of us.
Because of that date, I have to maybe not end with this, but this has to be said. Mm-hmm. You're looking at somebody who truly believes that as far as what we do in this country, celebrating our freedom and never forgetting the fallen, our Memorial Day, those are the 2 most important holidays in my career. And ever since, well, I think my brothers kept track of the number, but for pretty close to 30 years, when our families gather together for the 4th of July, yeah, I know it's been over 30 years. No one ever does anything. We don't eat any hot dogs, hamburgers, or anything. Definitely not the fireworks until we take part in a patriotic program. Mm-hmm. I began the first one where I had a little sound system, and I had about 10 or 12 kids come up and just say what freedom meant to them. Then later it evolved into, maybe a speech from someone or some patriotic tribute or whatever. And I've done things for 9/11 before. I've done. There's always, for the last 30 years, and the generations have changed as far as the kids, but I have people come out with flags and a color guard. And if I don't have a weapon, of course I don't, they have to carry a shovel or a fork or something, like on the pitchfork because we're out in the country. But these young kids will be carrying that with the flag. And we stand there and say the Pledge of Allegiance. And there's a moment of silence for the fallen every year. And that's something that is never going to end as long as I'm still standing.
There you go. So that will be tomorrow.
That's right.
Continuing the legacy.
That's correct.
So, okay. So we'll call this the end of part 1. And I want to thank you so much for agreeing to do this. We had a great time talking in the hog house probably 3 months ago, just talking about this. And I just feel so good that we've got you in front of the cameras, in front of the lights, and behind the microphone, and getting some of the stories. So when we hit part 2, then that'll be your re-enlistment forward, and we'll just see where that takes us.
Okay.
So, all right. Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
And I want to thank you for your service, too. You haven't mentioned it, really, but you spent a lot of years in uniform.
Yeah, 35 of those.
Yeah, so that's commendable.
Well, thank you very much. All right, and we'll see you again, Larry, in part 2.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Perfect.
Sure.
That was great.
I didn't know if I was. Sometimes,
flowed.
I mean, if you're at a radio, you want to have a banter because you're not seeing the person. Mm-hmm. But I hope it worked okay. 9/11. You know, when that, I'll tell you what, when they hit the Pentagon, it was game on for me. There was no way I was going to let my life go without being part of that fight.
Right.